We're going to talk a little bit about using files. I guess these would be non-Testlab files, but using them and processing them inside Simcenter Testlab and how you might go about using those files. Just to kind of give an idea, I wrote down some of the files that we support here. You know, ideally, we'd like to be able to bring in data from just about any source and be able to view it, analyze it, etc., inside Testlab. Show that here. If I start up Testlab, you know, you get your Testlab navigator, and in the navigator, under My Computer, you can go to a directory that contains external files. So in this case, I have a few of these types of files in this directory called Demo1. And unlike Testlab files, which have this little icon here, you can have a lot of different types of icons, different colors for different types of file formats. So for example, this one that's labeled RunUp might be a little hard to see. It's a UFF extension. That's a universal file. If I was to go into Windows and take a look for this directory, so Demo1, I just want to show you in Windows, you see there's a file runup.unv. That's a universal file. So that's how it knew to recognize it as RunUp. Notice it didn't put the extension. MRes is a motion results file. So Simcenter 3D, which is made by Siemens, it's our simulation software, can generate time histories from a motion file. So that's what that file is. And here's a wave file. So that also shows up, but with a slightly different icon. And I have a few others that I'll show eventually. But basically, that's what the view is, or what it looks like in Windows. This is what it looks like inside Testlab. If I highlight the universal file, it shows the contents over here, and we see the blue squiggly lines. Blue squiggly lines are a good thing. Those are things that we can display and look at. So if I opened a front-back display here, I can grab this time history. Maybe I'll put it in real format here first, drop it in, and I can see the data that's in this file. And I think one thing that's kind of nice about this is I didn't have to do any kind of translation or conversion on that file to look at it. All I did was highlight it, drag it in, because it automatically recognized the file. So I'm viewing it in its native format, for lack of a better word. No conversions or anything like that necessary. I can also look at something like the RPM, for example. So that's pretty good. You might want to process this. You can highlight it here. You can say replace in input basket, and we could turn on one of our processing products like signature throughput processing. There's signature throughput processing. So I have the navigator where I selected the data. I put it in the input basket. Again, the input basket is just you can put any data in the input basket that you want by picking this. It's just a pointer to that data. So I can pick up files from multiple places. You go to time data selection here, you hit replace, and you can then see the data that was put in the input basket. And if I go to time data processing, I can then say, okay, I want to process this data. I want to see like single FFT when I'm done here, 5,000 averages, maybe something like a 1 hertz resolution, or as close to that as I can get. I'll hit calculate, and now I have processed data that is in that universal file, and I have created some spectrums. And if I look in my project, I have this TP1, and I'm going to go back here. That's because I had the name TP here, stands for throughput processing. So we have this TP1, and in here is if I go down here, I can see the auto power that I calculated. So that's pretty good. But if you're used to using Testlab, one of the nice things is that in a run like this where it's processed data, it would have a reference to the time file that was used. And in this case, you can see that there's no record or anything of the time file, right? It was put in the input basket, still in its native file format. We don't really have a link to it. So some people might be like, oh, well, I'll just take this data in this universal file and maybe I'll just try and copy it into here. Notice there's no paste. There's only a paste as link, which might be good because you could point to it, but it's not really stored fully in the Testlab project and structure. So one of the things I wanted to show in this webinar was how you can transfer the data, so to speak, and here we will make a copy of it, into the Testlab project so it's more like a native Testlab file. So again, I had already done this, but I'll show it again. I can have the run-up data in the input basket. If I go to this time data selection, and I have the data showing here, there is a save as. And this save as for time data only, really, is available only in time data selection and allows you to kind of store it in the native Testlab file format. So when I hit save as here, it'll ask me, okay, what name do you want to use? I can call it run up 1. It'll put an extension on it. I'll hit OK. And what that actually did, if I go back to the navigator, is this run up is now a Testlab time history file format. And it is stored in the native structure of the Testlab project. So I have it's the exact same throughput that was in the universal file. Maybe I could even show that by picking two displays here. So here is the sound data that's now stored in the native file format, whereas over here is the sound data that was in the original universal file. It's the exact same data. One's kind of native, one isn't. And now, if I was to use this data, so if I put that in the input basket and I do a replace here, then I go in and do the processing. That was pretty quick. We can see that we now have a link to the original time data, whereas in the run that I did from the universal file, there is no link to the original data. So I get the exact same result, but it's all kind of stored together, which is kind of nice. In fact, things like if you right-click and you pick audio replay, for example, if there's no link to the time file, so in Testlab you can listen to things like a color map, for example. When you right-click and pick audio replay, if there's no link, it can't automatically find the time data to use for the audio replay. So that's another benefit. Audio replay will work very smoothly if you have it stored in the Testlab project first. And by the way, I can grab multiple files and save them all at the same time in the time data selection. And the secret there is to do the save in time data selection to kind of put it in the Testlab format. Time data selection, by the way, it's a freebie, no tokens, but it is something that you can turn on in order to, view time data and save it into the Testlab format. There are some additional benefits to storing it, and let me see if I can kind of show that here. So I have a WAV file here, and in the WAV file I can go ahead and look at it. And if you notice, it's taken a while to display. That's because the driver for the WAV file maybe isn't all that efficient. If I zoom in, I can eventually see that there, some of the details in this WAV file. It's a sine wave in it, but the display is kind of slow and laggy. Displaying it wasn't quick. When things are stored in LDSF format, the Testlab native format, stands for streaming data file. You take advantage of the number of bits on the screen to show and visualize data very quickly. But I'll say replace an input basket here. I'll go to time data selection. Replace wiped out was in there previously. I did another replace here. And now I'll do a save as, and I'll just call it wave or something to make it very clear to me. And now again, it's translating from the WAV file into the Testlab format. And so if I go to Navigator, and then I find the WAV file that I just stored here, same data instantaneously shows up. Whereas the original WAV file, if I work with that, then it's not instantaneous. And that's because of the special things that we do with our native format to make viewing the data much quicker, where we have things like showing the maxes, because we know there's not enough pixels to show every single data sample, so we don't have to load it. I do coupled limits here. It really is the same data, so I'm zooming in. When I zoom in, should be a little quicker probably on the bottom, a little slower on the top, but yeah, you can see that it's the same data in the end. There is an advantage to storing it. You get this, it's all linked, and then the data is all together, and then you have things like actually faster performance when accessing the data. Nothing precludes you from leaving it in the original format and processing directly from it, but it's pretty nice when you can put it into the Testlab format. This other file here with the MRES, motion result file, is from a simulation model. So just like, I might have a recording in universal file format or from some other recording system, I can also look at simulation data in a similar way. In this case, it happens to be our file format. If I look at this, I can, again, directly grab and view data that's stored in the simulation model. Incompatible units, I can move that to the back so I can see it. So I got a velocity and an acceleration in here. Now, one of the things with something like a simulation model that is used to generate time histories at a whole bunch of different elements, you could have a lot of elements. In this case, I have like 300 results. This could be a big file up on a network drive or whatever. What do I want to say? It's potentially a huge file with lots of extraneous information that maybe I'm not interested in because they could have solved at every single element, etc. So another advantage of trying to bring it in and copying the stuff into the project is, instead of going here and adding to the input basket, which would add all the time data that's in this solution file, I can go in here, and if I'm only interested in two key spots and analyzing them, I can hold down the control key, highlight these two, and I can put just those two in the input basket. So if I look at input basket, I have two of all the channels that are in the model available to me. And if I go to time data selection, hit replace, do a save as, this is a motion simulation model, hit OK. What I've done is I've extracted those two channels out of that file, which again could be on a network drive. I've copied them to my local directory, and then I'm able to manipulate and look at those two files very quickly. And if I drop this in, it should look very similar to before. So that, I think, is another advantage of doing the copying. I could work with a subset of the project and look and analyze the data that way and still do my calculations.